Hello, and welcome back to this Elasticsearch tutorial. In this part, now that we've already installed and configured Elasticsearch and reviewed the basic APIs available for ingesting and querying information, we'll take a look at Logstash, which is another tool within the Elastic community that allows you to ingest information not only into Elasticsearch but also into many other outputs. So what is Logstash? Logstash is basically a processing pipeline for ingesting data. What does that mean? In layman terms, it means that Logstash grabs information from one or several places, transforms it, aggregates it, and any other transformations that you like to set, and then outputs that information into one or several places that you configure. Logstash is able to grab information from databases, HTTP requests, Elasticsearch queries, files, XMPP protocol, and many others. Elasticsearch inputs, filters, and outputs are configured via plugins. By default, Logstash already includes several plugins, but others can be downloaded and configured to increase the functionality of your Logstash installation. These plugins allow you to pull information from many places, such as the exec plugin that allows you to execute a command and capture the output, the CloudWatch, which is used for AWS CloudWatch API, reading events from GitHub, from Twitter, from TCP, system logs, and many others, including JDBC, which can be used to pull information from database. That can be very useful if you're integrating Elasticsearch into an existing system that already uses a relational database. You can use Logstash with the JDBC plugin to pull information from the database, convert it, and output it into Elasticsearch. Elasticsearch is able to output its information, into Elasticsearch, CSV, or other types of files, email, HTTP requests, Solar, which is another search engine similar to Elasticsearch, And just like for inputs, you can output the information to many other places. You can execute a command in the command line. You can write to Google or Amazon storage. You can even write the events to IRC or back to a database. You can also use the same Logstash configuration to output to two different places at once. For example, you can output your information into an Elasticsearch instance and then email yourself a notification that the information was input. Logstash is a great complement to Elasticsearch because it automates and simplifies many of the usual data ingestion tasks that you usually have with Elasticsearch. Being part of the same ecosystem, it is very compatible with Elasticsearch. Let's give it a shot. We're going to install Logstash using the targc file that you can get from the Elastic webpage, just like we did for Elasticsearch. So we get the file and we extract it. One thing to note is that Logstash requires you to have Java installed in your computer. So you can check whether Java is installed by running the Java version command. If you don't have it installed, the command line will suggest a command to install Java. Now we have Java installed, rather Logstash, sorry. And we're going into the bin directory where the actual script to run Logstash is located. And the simplest way we can run Logstash is by simply running the Logstash script. However, because we haven't specified any inputs or outputs, this will not be a very interesting Logstash. So let's try a very simple configuration. What we're going to do is that we're going to try to start Logstash, grab the input from the started input, and as you can see, Logstash throws an error because no configuration file is available. Instead, let's pass a configuration as a command line argument. In this case, we're simply specifying that the input is the started input, that is the command line, and the output is the standard output, again the command line. Let's run Logstash with this configuration. And Logstash takes a little bit of time to start up, but once you have it running, it's worth it. In this case, you can see that I get a message that says successfully started Logstash API endpoint. So let's try and use the configuration that we just set. Because we're using the started input, if I type something into the console, it will be processed by Logstash and then output back into the standard output. Let's try the usual hello world. As you can see, this was grabbed by Logstash, and a couple of fields were added: the host name for my machine, a timestamp for when this record was created, and the version. And if I output anything else, it will be processed in a similar manner. However, even though we've now run and tested Logstash, this is still not very interesting. Let's try something else. I've prepared a configuration file that I'm going to use with my Logstash installation. So I'm going to copy that to the bin folder just for ease of use, although this could be set in the conf directory. And I'm going to run Elasticsearch using this configuration. But what's on that configuration file? First, the input is still going to be my standard input, since I don't have any database or any other input that I'd like to use. And then I'm going to output this, instead of to the standard output, to the Elasticsearch instance that we've configured in the previous videos. And to do that, I'm using the Elasticsearch plugin that's included by default with Logstash and passing two parameters to it. As you can see, the index, which is the test index that we've been using, and a host that specifies where my Elasticsearch instance is running. In this case, this is localhost because I'm on the same machine, and port 9200, which is the same one we've been using. So if I run Logstash using this configuration file, instead of outputting the processed documents to the standard output like we just did, this should go straight into our Elasticsearch instance, into the test index. You can see that Logstash has now successfully started. And let's do one final thing before we do this. Now, I'm using the search API endpoint in order to search not for just one or two documents, but to use a query. And again, this is something that we're going to look into in a following video, so don't worry too much about it, but just know that this searches for all of the documents within our index. And because I'm already specifying the test index, this should show me all the documents that are within my index. And if you look at the hits or the result list from my query, you can see that I only have one, Tom, which is the only document that we left after testing the document API in a previous video. But if I go back to Logstash and I type something, for example, once again, hello world, this is now posted into Elasticsearch. So if I run this query again, you can see that I have two records now. Tom, which is the one that I previously created, and the record that I created using my Logstash configuration. In this case, and in most cases, the fields that you get sent to Elasticsearch are determined first by the input plugin that you're using. If you're using the standard input, which is honestly mostly a debugging or test case, you would get these four fields. If you're using something like a JDBC connection, then the fields that you will get depend on the input table that you're using. However, you can use filters for Logstash to modify and change those fields either within themselves or into other new field types. This is very useful because instead of having to program a tool that grabs the information, transforms it, and then outputs it into Elasticsearch for search queries, you can simply configure Logstash and use that to ingest information into your Elasticsearch instance. In a real-world application, this is very useful because it saves a lot of time on development. That's it for the Logstash section of this tutorial, but you can go to the Logstash documentation to go into a bit more depth into all the things that Logstash can do and how it can interact not just with Elasticsearch, but with many other sources and outputs in order to transform your information. As we just saw, even though Logstash makes it sound like it's meant for logs, and it possibly was that way once, nowadays Logstash can get information from many places and be very useful for many cases. That's it for now, but in the next video we'll look into how to query the information from Logstash, from Elasticsearch, instead of grabbing just one record at a time or grabbing all of the records like we did for this test.